James Bowden joining us. James, hi. How do you look at the entire, uh, the U.S.-Iran metrics at this point in time? You have Trump, and on one day saying that the ceasefire is over. Then he's saying that Iran is calling him, and now it's at the end of the day, you don't have any containers or ships moving out of Hormuz.
Right now, what we are looking at is kind of a conflict on pause, but I actually anticipate that we will see some renewed action here in the next 24 to 48 hours. Yes, there is probably a little bit of back channel discussion and conversations between the two countries and with the intermediaries, but with all of the events that have been taking place, especially last night, I really anticipate that what we're going to see is a resumption of the conflict, like I said, in just a short time. You know, many of the strikes that the United States carried out had a very significant economic and military impact. This was a very broad range of targets that were hit. And I do think that it is reducing Iran's capability to absorb these types of strikes. And eventually, if the United States keeps hitting these key areas repeatedly, Iran is likely going to have to get to the negotiating table. But in the statements that they're issuing, it still sounds like they've got plenty of fight left before they come to that point.
James, I wonder how you're looking at the changed stance of NATO in all of this.
Well, I think that, you know, the blockade was going to bring NATO in. I think that Donald Trump wanted the blockade to continue because had it continued a little bit longer, Europe would have been forced into a position of having to intercede. Now, the fact that Trump was able to get the MOU and to break the blockade, that was definitely a big sigh of relief for NATO because then they could continue to have their policy. Now, don't forget that Europe is already invested in a way in this conflict. They continue to keep the Red Sea and the Bab al-Mandab open and free. So, you know, they do have to weigh these different options and figure out what is the best means of keeping their economies afloat. And right now they have decided to lean more heavily on the Bab al-Mandab and the Red Sea as their primary trade channel. So looking at the Persian Gulf, looking at the Strait of Hormuz, I think they've made a strategic calculation that the United States is handling it and that our efforts are going to continue to keep at least the southern channel flowing. And as long as that's going a little bit, then I think they can take their time. Now, I think you just indicated that there had been a slowdown in the traffic. I suspect that that will probably, if there's not a resumption of firing in next 24 to 48 hours, then that will probably resume again. But it's going to be a little bit difficult, a little bit tricky.
So, James, in the interim, how do you propose investors maneuver through the equity markets and all the news flow, buy more of the same, be bullish on the AI trade?
If I were an investor, I would just kind of keep very careful track of developments. You know, I'm not an investor, so I've never really kind of understood market dynamics and forces. But what I can tell you is that we're going to need to look at this conflict through the long haul. We're going to have to look at it through a long-term lens because Iran still has a long way to go before they come to the negotiating table in full and good faith. And as long as we have Donald Trump in office, he is going to continue to be aggressive at driving this message home that Iran must come to the negotiating table and give up on the Strait of Hormuz. So I don't see any changes in the near future in that regard. And I just, so, just trying to give your investors a little bit perspective that, what we're looking at is maybe something that's going to last the rest of the year. And I really do believe that. And I actually see long-term changes. We've seen Iraq, we've seen Syria, we've seen various countries already making long-term adjustments. There have been agreements to begin exploration for alternative routes for oil going out of northern Iraq through Syria and into Turkish ports. Saudi Arabia is talking a lot about redirecting their Red Sea trade. And what that tells me is that, the longer that this conflict persists, there is the actual possibility that the Persian Gulf may become irrelevant, might actually no longer be a viable option. And that would actually be a bad thing for both Iran and the Gulf monarchies because they have invested a significant amount of their money and a lot of their future economic projections based on continued incomes from that traffic. And so Iran is creating a very difficult situation and might be sowing the seeds of its own destruction here. So, but I don't think that they're really thinking about that right now because they're a very ideologically, religiously driven nation.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. But James, so good chatting with you and getting in all the holistic perspective on not just geopolitics, but how it would translate into investments as well. Good to have you on the show today.